Yeah, we'll see who remembers 2011 and fighting off against Chandelures in the fire and ghost typing out here. But going up against Brandon, who will be running a little bit more of the standard Raging Bolt balance teams that we've been seeing, with notably the notable exception of Chin Pao being kind of back on top for these balance teams as a major offensive threat. And again, I think Articuno in Utrecht really showing off that, yep, Ice is still an incredible attacking type. And, you know, if Articuno can get away with the Ice typing and using 4 Ice type attacks, you could also use the ruinous Pokemon Chin Pao and get, you know, very powerful physically offensive Ice type attacks and access to Sucker Punch and Sacred Sword.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a more conservative option. It's weird to apply that idea to Chin Pao, a Pokemon that doesn't believe in the concept of defensive stats. So much so that, yeah, it reduces everyone else's. Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit easier to fit on a team. You know, it fits into more conventional team compositions. But yeah, a big part of why the Articuno team was so powerful is that people just didn't have enough ice resistances. And I think it's sort of a neat way to get around that where, okay, well, I can still take advantage of that without committing my entire team to it if players haven't prepared. And this is certainly a team that looks like it doesn't want to, especially be hit by ice type attacks.
Yeah, again, the Ice type on the offense is really strong into Dylan's team. You can see on your screen both of these players. Brandon is running the Chin Pao, the King Gambit, Raging Bolt, Hearthflame, Ogerpon, Amoonguss, and that is the Rapid Strike Urshifu, so not the Single Strike. Normally we would just assume Rapid Strike, but as the Single Strike has become more popular, that is sort of back to basics with that Rapid Strike Urshifu. Up against the Wellspring Mask Ogerpon and the Single Strike Urshifu on Dylan's side, the Skeledirge Tornadus and Raging Bolt and Landorus Incarnate form. Like you mentioned, 3 Pokemon there hit super effectively by Ice type attacks from that Chin Pao, the Ice Spinner. And notably, we have another Safety Goggles Raging Bolt here, but not the Calm Mind variant.
Yeah, both sides having Raging Bolt here, but they're very different Pokemon. I think, again, one of the reasons why Pokemon get to that level of usage is because they can use them a variety of different ways so they fit on more teams. I think the other Pokemon that really stands out to me here is this Ogerpon, both because I think Hearthflame Ogerpon is always fun to watch, where it's a Pokemon that succeeds because the team's a little bit more built around it than the Wellspring Ogerpon. So I think things always tend to be more exciting, but especially with the Stomping Tantrum there, rather than something like Swords Dance, just looking to trade a little bit more, right? Not the long-term setup, which you might have expected with, Amoonguss there to help slow things down. And, I guess kind of several Pokemon on this team that sometimes have boosting attacks, but here, just looking to slug it out as quickly as he can.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was noticing as well. You have Amoonguss for Rage Powder and Spore to defend any Pokemon that may want to start setting up, but all of King Gambit, Hearthflame Ogerpon, and the Raging Bolt are not opting for any boosting attacks. That King Gambit is still running the black glasses, but has Iron Head coverage. The Ogerpon has that Stomping Tantrum, so no Swords Dance and no Follow Me for Brandon. But here we see Dylan's team. Dylan, on the opposite side of things, has the Skeledirge with the Torch Song and the ability to boost itself there. But again, not a whole lot of boosting happening here. But again, the big difference, the Raging Bolts, that Assault Vest.
Yeah, I kind of really loved this team preview where, to me, this is one team where once I get the open team sheet, even though I can see all of the moves, I'm not necessarily super excited about what I see, where there's just so many different versions of a look that Dylan could give you, where I think it's really difficult to guess what's going to happen in that first turn, where Tornadus also having Leer, just like another damage calculation change you have to worry about. Raging Bolt able to change things up with both Electroweb and with Snarl. What the heck is a Skeledirge? There's a lot to think about here. You have a substitute Landorus. Again, Urshifu, a Pokemon that puts out a lot of pressure. You've got to worry about the Follow Me for the Ogerpon. I kind of feel like no matter what Dylan brings, there's always a really complicated game state that's going to come with it.
Yeah, lots of interesting options here on Dylan's side. The Leer Tornadus, I think, is extremely interesting. Pairs really well alongside either of the physical attackers that Dylan is running. The Urshifu and Ogerpon both love to see defenses dropped. And also doesn't mean that you have to keep those Pokemon in. Like if you were running a Swords Dance Ogerpon, you wouldn't want to switch it back out. Now you have the ability to, or you can use Tornadus to put that pressure with Leer on the defensive drops to make sure that Brandon isn't safe to stay in.
Yeah, I think we would be remiss not to mention King Gambit in the matchup in reference to some of the Pokemon we just mentioned. Pokemon that just loves having its stats reduced. I think that it's very likely we're going to see that in this matchup. You can kind of scare away any potential Leers Electrowebs or Snarls. At the very least, make Dylan think twice about hitting those buttons. Conversely, one of the weaknesses of Skeledirge relative to most of the other fire-type Pokemon we see in the format is it's weak to those dark-type attacks, which further troubles this. However, King Gambit typically looking for perhaps a Sucker Punch to take advantage of a Ghost-type Pokemon. A little bit trickier to do when that fire-type and Ghost-type Pokemon is able to use Will-O-Wisps. So some fun interactions in both directions here.
Yeah, and I actually just noticed when we were thinking about Leer, they will be boosted by Tornadus's Prankster ability into either the King Gambit or the Chien Pao to potentially, King Gambit you don't want to lower the stats of, and Chien Pao has the Focus Sash. Actually, those are safe switch-ins into Leer now because it will fail on the Dark typing. So Leer is actually not quite as strong as Dylan may want for that Pokemon, but great note on the Skeledirge, that Will-O-Wisp, if it can dodge those Sucker Punches from either the Chien Pao or the King Gambit, could be really big, and of course does not really care about most normal Ogerpon, but this with the Stomping Tantrum, Skeledirge may have to start looking out for that.
Yeah, I think it's really fun where, but you can imagine worlds where both sides' coverage moves are really effective here. Another Pokemon we haven't mentioned a whole lot of is that Landorus, but I think that could be really important for Dylan. There are several Pokemon, especially the really problematic Pokemon on Brandon's side of the field that Landorus could potentially get an advantage against. Perhaps try to get a substitute up and then, do what you can to avoid having Urshifu just ruin all your fun there with Surging Strikes, try to break the substitute and get some damage as well. But of course, then there's the Ogerpon on the other side of the field who could try to interrupt that. I think that this could be a real back and forth game where I think the team that has the lead advantage in turn one could have a big advantage here just because there's so many ways that things can snowball one direction or the other.
Well, speaking of turn one, we are in it right now of round 6 in Vancouver. Skeledirge and the Wellspring Mask Ogerpon out on the field for Dylan, up against that Choice Scarf Urshifu and Chien Pao for Brandon. So Chien Pao out on the field, lowering the defenses of both Ogerpon and Skeledirge and Urshifu, which will be Choice Scarf, so probably not feeling too safe to lock into the Surging Strikes into that Skeledirge with Ogerpon on the field.
A really fun turn here where things go very wrong for either side depending on kind of the predictions they make, where even Ogerpon could take a bunch of damage here if it tries to play it safe and follow me, but neither of these Pokemon want to be burned either.
Yeah.
So it should be a lot of fun here. Exciting to see what players opt to go for. Again, I think the beginning of this match is just really important where falling behind early, losing a Pokemon quickly, getting status quickly, can make it really hard to maneuver throughout the rest of this match.
Well, here we go into this match, a Terastallization to kick us off in round 6. That is a full water typing for the Wellspring Ogerpon. No longer has the water absorbability, but does remove the weakness to the bug type U-turn that is possibly coming out from the Choice Scarf Urshifu. Brandon will go ahead and protect the Chien Pao this turn, not going to take any damage from the Skeledirge or Ogerpon. That U-turn dealing about half of what Brandon would have wanted because of the Terastallization, and now Brandon gets to bring in a Pokemon in the back. Knowing that neither of these Pokemon on Dylan's side have protected means whatever is coming in has the ability to take attacks from both of these Pokemon, and wouldn't you know it, Raging Bolt is happy to tank a Horn Leech coming out from that Wellspring Ogerpon with the full Embody aspect on the board, and anything coming out from the Skeledirge, which does try to burn the Chien Pao, but does not get anything into the Protect. And now, Raging Bolt is on the field pretty much free.
Yeah, pretty good little switch for that Raging Bolt there, right? Where has a pretty good matchup with both of these Pokemon, resists most of their attacks. Avoid what could have been a pretty devastating burn there. I don't think any attack from Chien Pao would have been worth getting burned. So I think Brandon's probably feeling pretty good about that turn. And now Dylan's got to adjust a little bit, right? Where don't want to have this poor water type Pokemon, even with the boosted special attack, or boosted special defense rather, facing down this electric type Pokemon for too long. But it'll be Chien Pao fleeing battle first.
Chien Pao flees the battle, which means that Raging Bolt's defense is back to what it should be. Here comes the Hearth Flame Ogerpon, which will be able to tank a Will-O-Wisp with its fighting typing, or fire typing. as Ogerpon switches out on Dylan's side for Landorus, able to tank any kind of electric type attacks coming out from the Raging Bolt. Immunities on both sides. Will-O-Wisp into the Hearthflame Ogerpon, but will be taking a big Thunderbolt for its troubles. Skeletor's taking about half its health there. Brandon not getting baited by the Ogerpon and the Landorus switch out.
Yeah, another really good trade by Brandon. They're getting Landorus on the field is a big deal, though. Both the Pokemon that Brandon is out going to have a hard time fighting against this Landorus, but he does still have his Terrestrialization available. Perhaps make Dylan think twice about committing too hard for anything. And we also kind of see the drawback of Skeletor's there. One of the reasons why we don't tend to see a lot of it is its stats are perhaps not as well optimized as many of the other Pokemon we typically see in the video game championships, and that's like quite a bit of damage for just a neutral attack from a Pokemon holding the Assault Vest.
Yeah, the Assault Vest, no offensive attack investment
Safety
from
goggles,
that Raging
yeah.
Bolt, or safety goggles
But
from
no
that
boost,
Raging
no
Bolt.
boost is really the key
No
there.
boost, exactly. The important thing is that Skeletor just took a bunch of damage, does have the ability to slack off and heal it back up, possibly dodging a Thunderclap. But we'll just have to see how Dylan's going to be able to preserve his final Pokemon as Ogerpon goes for a Terrestrialization immediately, getting the Embody Aspect boost, going to go to +1 attack on this heavy hitter of a Pokemon. The Hearthflame Ogerpon able to do big damage now with Ivy Cudgel. But Dylan is afraid of that, protects Landorus, making sure that Landorus is safe for this turn. Does not take any damage from that Ivy Cudgel. Instead, just the protect as the Skeletor gets to fire off a Shadow Ball into the Raging Bolt. Like you mentioned, no Assault Vest, so still takes a little bit of damage, but another Thunderbolt able to just pick up the KO onto Skeletor. So Skeletor on the field didn't do a whole lot of anything. It failed 2 Will-O-Wisps and launched a Shadow Ball into the Raging Bolt, was immediately knocked out.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not the worst thing in the world, though, right? I think Brandon did a great job of controlling it there, dodging 2 Will-O-Wisps, once with the Protect and then with the immunity, but did force a Terrestrialization. I think that's big for Dylan because he was forced to Terrestrialize that very first turn because of the Urshifu. Now both sides committing to Terrestrializing their Ogerpons, and it's a nice spot now for Dylan to try to make a comeback here, threatening the option of a Tailwind with the Tornadus, and then Landorus trying to fire off a big hit to one of these Pokemon now, but they can't Terrestrialize to try to flip the type chart.
Yeah, one of the scariest things about being a Landorus player is not knowing if you are faster than the opponent's Ogerpon or not. But with the Tailwind, Dylan knows Landorus is now the fastest thing on the field and picks up a one-hit KO on that Ogerpon with an Earth Power. Huge KO there, huge offensive threat off the field for Brandon. And the Dragon Pulse with a critical hit just barely fails to pick up the KO in return on Landorus. That means Urshifu or Chien-Pao could come back out here and do have access, both of them, to priority attacks to knock that Landorus out.
Yeah, I really like the move of attacking Landorus there instead of trying to knock out the Tornadus. Perhaps you can easily knock it out with the Thunderbolt, but is Tornadus staying on the field really that big of a problem for you? Where,
yeah, you have Raging Bolt. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly. You deal with it later, and I think instead you're getting the damage of Landorus now, threatening a knockout with any of the priority moves. The critical hit could matter there. The damage on the surface doesn't make a big difference, but perhaps if that hadn't happened, it would have enough HP, or at least it could threaten the opportunity to substitute at some point in the game. It's now so weakened that it can't really do anything but try to swing one more time at some point. And neither of these Pokemon in a position where they're likely to be super excited about what they're facing down as Aqua Jet comes in and picks up the knockout.
Yeah, no opportunity to protect in the face of the Urshifu, which picks up a critical hit for good measure on the way out. Aqua Jet, though, will knock out the Landorus. Tornadus fires back with the Bleak Wind Storm, deals good damage to that Choice Scarfed Urshifu, but not enough to pick up the one-hit KO. And Raging Bolt tanks it easily, doesn't need an Assault Vest to tank a Bleak Wind Storm, and just fires back a one-hit KO into that Tornadus in return. And now it is just the fully terrestrialized Wellspring Ogerpon staring down the Urshifu, the Raging Bolt, and the Chien-Pao in the back.
Yeah, sort of an awkward position for Brandon here, but not really anything stopping him from maneuvering around, getting these Pokemon back on the field. Chien-Pao still has that Focus Sash intact because it was not burned by the Skeletor earlier in the game, and what now looks like an insurmountable advantage in Game 1 for Brandon.
Yeah, the one thing is this Raging Bolt is a little bit low, and Dylan does have the special defense boost to potentially tank, the weaker Thunderclap more than the Thunderbolt. But by being able to switch out, it gets kind of risky. Do you switch in your Chien-Pao and risk losing the Focus Sash for kind of free, but you need to target down the Raging Bolt? there is a world where you could just sort of catch the right protects and still make this happen with Ogerpon.
I think I attack on this turn if I'm the Raging Bolt, where I think the only way you lose is just making a bunch of huge mistakes over and over and just making sure you get damage down. You're attacking at least once. I just feel like Dylan's too far behind if you keep the damage in. When you see the Thunderclap, I think that's wise. And, oh, man, that's a lot of damage.
Yeah, that's so much damage, even though this Pokemon has the Embody aspect boost to the special defense. Dylan tries to pick up the KO and succeeds with the Ivy Cudgel because of the Terrestrialization. But yeah, with that damage down onto the Ogerpon, Chien-Pao gets in for free, still has Focus Sash, and there is still the Choice Scarfed Urshifu to deal with. That should be game 1 for Brandon.
Yeah, Ogerpon's a mighty Pokemon, but only able to attack one opponent at a time, and with so little HP, there just isn't a way here. Really fun first game, though, where there were several turns where it seemed like things could go either way, but I think Brandon played those first few turns of this game so well, just avoiding taking any unnecessary damage, and it really paid off at the end, where his Pokemon were just healthy enough to have a really clean endgame.
Absolutely, and Dylan with no options, again, saving that Urshifu for cleanup. Can't protect in the face of an Urshifu, so that's just going to be game for Brandon, as Dylan taking his time to figure out what adjustments need to be made for game 2. It's really strong. You know, Brandon led the Chien-Pao and the Urshifu into the Ogerpon and the Skeledirge, and you know, really it feels like that Skeledirge didn't get enough going. You know, just missed, it whiffed those 2 Will-O-Wisps, fired off a single Shadow Ball. And it wasn't until the Skeledirge went down and Tornadus came out on the field to set Tailwind support that Dylan was able to get anything happening in that game. So I have to wonder if the Skeledirge is going to sit out in game 2 or potentially hide in the back for a while.
Yeah, the Skeledirge kind of looked like when I tried to play Skeledirge there, where it just kind of hung out, was momentum sink, and then lost. I guess it's, if you think back to those turns, though, I mean, like, okay, well, what if you made different choices, right? Well, I mean, you could have attacked the other slot, but we saw Shadow Ball didn't really do that much to the Raging Bolt, which would have swapped in anyway, and I mean, having it burned wouldn't have really made that big of a difference. I think, you know, even with better reads, I just don't feel like Skeledirge is going to have enough opportunity really to make a difference in that particular matchup.
Yeah, and this Raging Bolt was actually a nightmare for Dylan on Brandon's side. When the Landorus went down, there was nothing Dylan could do to that Raging Bolt. Took multiple attacks, took the Shadow Ball, finally able to clean it up with the Terrestrialization boosted Ivy Cudgel from Ogerpon. But that was after a number of turns of chip damage, and Raging Bolt was just sort of running through the team otherwise. You know, able to deal super effective damage to Tornadus, super effective damage to Ogerpon, and without Dylan being able to do anything in response. You know, after losing his only ground type attack from Landorus and not bringing his own Raging Bolt, had no other options to hit that Pokemon for super effective damage.
Yeah, I think that'll be interesting now as we think about what these trainers are trying to do in game 2, where I don't feel like any of their Pokemon are like totally unpickable in this matchup. So I think Dylan could easily swap either Pokemon for Skeledirge. I think probably part of why we did see it in that game is that, you know, we're talking in the pregame that, well, maybe King Gambit's scary, right? And like having Will-O-Wisp makes that matchup a lot simpler. Wound up being there was no King Gambit to burn, and instead poor Skeledirge just kind of out there just not really being able to get a lot done, and that's what's scary. I think why that first game is very important in a matchup like this, where the team matchup is pretty volatile, where now, you know, if this time perhaps Brandon messes up the team preview, at least you only get to 1-1, where now there's a ton of pressure on Dylan. I think it's a really tough spot to be in, just because yeah, you know, there isn't a clear best way to play this matchup. I think it depends a lot on what both trainers choose to bring to the battle.
Well, we are just about ready to hop into our second match here, as both of these players are hoping to go 6-0. Brandon just needs to win one more game, while Dylan is going to have to win this match to keep that undefeated record alive heading into game 3.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Brandon doesn't change things up very much. It just felt very clean, right? A lot of control there, and
so many options.
Yeah, I think I'd want to make Dylan beat what I brought to that first game before I really try to go back to the drawing board, because I thought he had a lot of wiggle room in that first game.
Well, here we are in game 2. Dylan has switched it up, going for the Raging Bolt of his own, and Tornadus on the field immediately. Like you mentioned, Brandon is saying, yep, it was good enough for game 1. Can you beat this? And Dylan has at least given himself the tools needed to, outspeed this Choice Scarf Urshifu, or just threaten it immediately with his own Raging Bolt.
Yeah, one thing I love about this lead combination we see from Brandon 2 games in a row, the previous game, it forced a terrestrialization in turn 1, and you've got to wonder if that doesn't happen again here. You'd like to start going the offense with Raging Bolt, but can you really just leave that in the field across from a Qian Pao? Not really, right? You've either got to switch or terrestrialize realistically. So again, Brandon perhaps going to be able to pull out that terrestrialization early and make the rest of the game that much simpler for him.
Yeah, it's so important to get the terrestrialization early because it just limits the amount of options that Dylan has. If you can sort of eliminate some of that uncertainty, it makes other plays in the future, like going for Ice Spinners into Raging Bolts, going for Ice Spinners into Tornadus, much safer, instead of potentially risking hitting a Steel-type Terra from this Tornadus, which is what Dylan is opting for, trying to protect his Flying-type Pokemon that is able to set Tailwind, while Raging Bolt just fires off a Thunderclap into the Qian Pao, not targeting down the Urshifu, but Urshifu just going for a U-turn to pivot around.
Interesting, too, to see a U-turn now, so we know there wasn't a Tailwind from this Tornadus or a Leer, I guess. It's a lot of fun.
No Tailwind, no Leer means we could expect a Bleakwind Storm to come in, and wouldn't you know it, all Brandon has are Grass types in the back.
Awkward, and really cool read from Dylan here where, maybe you wind up giving up the Raging Bolt for this, but was able to trade some damage, and perhaps, a Bleakwind Storm in exchange for Raging Bolt could be worth it.
Yeah, and the Ice Spinner into that Steel-type Tornadus now deals pitiful damage as Bleakwind Storm picks up the KO on Qian Pao after the Thunderclap and deals good damage to the Amoonguss on the switch end.
I love it. Dylan gets away with it, right? Brandon thinking the same thing I was. Oh, there's no way he's going to leave that in and not terrestrialize it, but that's exactly what happens, and that's how you get to 5-0 using a team like this one, right? Really bold play by Dylan, but he gives up nothing but the terrestrialization, I suppose, but picks up a knockout, deals a bunch of damage to Amoonguss, who's now going to struggle a little bit getting its health back, even with Regenerator, where, are you going to switch out and make poor Urshifu get hit by a Bleakwind Storm instead? Perhaps, where the cost is going to be really difficult, or really high, where I love that turn. Really dangerous play by Dylan, where he could easily have just lost the game in the first turn, but he hit the read. That's what you got to do sometimes.
Hit the read, and Dylan identifying that the Flying-type damage coming out from Tornadus matches up really well into most of the Pokemon that Brandon has. Realistically, what else could that Urshifu have switched out into? It could have been the Raging Bolt in the back, but, got the call, hit the Amoonguss on the switch in, and with the combo of the Thunderclap and the Bleakwind picked up the Qian Pao.
Yeah, and speaking of which, he probably knows now Raging Bolt's not in the back because it would have come out, right?
Absolutely.
So he gets a ton of information out of that turn.
Ooh, and the Tailwind Draco Meteor into Amoonguss picks up the KO as well. So Raging Bolt now dropping its special attack as Tailwind finally going up for Dylan. Tornadus has done its job. We'll go down to this Ivy Cudgel from the Ogerpon. So Brandon finally fires back and gets a KO on Dylan's Pokemon, but now it is just the Choice Scarf Urshifu and the Hearthflame Ogerpon up against 3 Pokemon, 2 of which Dylan has not revealed yet.
Yeah, just a wonderful position to be in if you're Dylan now, where can I do the math okay, well, I know one of these Pokemon can't protect. If I have some means to which I know I can pick up the knockout with the help of this Tailwind here, the remainder of the game becomes pretty simple. Urshifu coming out here makes this a little bit interesting, but yeah, just a really exciting game so far. Dylan, showing it's not going to be so easy to knock out of this match.
Yeah, well, interestingly, Brandon has not used his terrestrialization yet, so has the opportunity to either go for the offense on Ogerpon or this Urshifu running the Grass Terra type, able to resist Thunderclaps coming out from Raging Bolt. Puts things in a much tighter position for Dylan than it might seem otherwise, and no follow me on Ogerpon.
Yeah, I think his team sheet's really helping him out here. I think, perhaps if this was close team sheet, you'd assume a different Terra type on this Urshifu would be a little bit less spooked. But because it is one of those Terra types that kind of just flips the whole type chart, makes the situation a little trickier for Dylan, where he's still got to hit one more big read to close out this game.
Yeah, and with the special attack drop from the Draco Meteor as well, those Thunderclaps and Thunderbolts would be a little less beefy to begin with, but Brandon is just going for offense. Goes for the terrestrialization on the Hearthflame Ogerpon, boosting the physical attack of that Pokemon and getting extra damage boost on the Ivy Cudgel, but Tailwind is still in effect. Wicked Blow will connect, and deal big damage to that Hearthflame Ogerpon as Brandon fires back with a Surging Strikes into Dylan's Urshifu. Means that Dylan's Raging Bolt, now the final Pokemon to be able to attack in this turn, just picks up the KO on Ogerpon with a second Draco Meteor. And now, with just the Urshifu locked into Surging Strikes because of that Choice Scarf, no Terrestrialization to save itself, and 3 Pokemon, 1 still unrevealed on Dylan's side. We're headed to Game 3.
Yeah, hard to imagine the way this one goes wrong. A really great game by Dylan there, and what an exciting game so far, right? Where showing Dylan maybe on the back foot in the team matchup. If you make the right reads, you can still pull it out.
Yeah, so many interesting reads there from Dylan. Like you mentioned, the open team sheet format really helping Brandon out. You know, Dylan did not decide to target down the Urshifu at all, but instead, you know, the real damage threat here is going to be that Ogerpon, no matter what. Let me just fire off my Draco Meteor and Wicked Blow into it, pick that Pokemon off the field, and then what? This Urshifu is going to lock into Surging Strikes into my Raging Bolt. I can Thunderclap it at any chance, anytime I want.
Yeah, even after 2 Draco Meteors there, nearly a 2-hit knockout. Close Combat to come in here and pick up this knockout. Fantastic game 2 by Dylan, and you kind of see the power also of that Urshifu and Tailwind. Tornadoes made itself such a threat, there was really no choice but to knock it out in that game, and then Urshifu gets to come out and take advantage of that, where, you know, often with these speed control moves, and we used to players trying to stall it out with Protect or whatever, and Urshifu does not allow that mechanic thanks to that Unseen Fist ability.
Yeah, really interesting, really great game 2 there from Dylan. Going to protect the Tornadus turn 1 with the Steel Terra, being able to catch the Amoonguss on the switch in. Realize that Brandon really only has King Gambit and the Raging Bolt for flying type resist. Brandon had not shown the King Gambit before, and by leading his own Raging Bolt, Dylan would have been able, because knew to be able to pick up the KO on the Chin Pao with both of those, you know, both the Thunderclap and the Bleak Wind Storm, being able to threaten the enemy Raging Bolt as well on a potential switch in. So instead, getting the jackpot, getting 3 flying type weaknesses that Brandon brought, no real shot after taking that first turn.
Yeah, I love it too, where, I mean, so many players, when you know you have the Tailwind available, it's just so hard not to click the button sometimes. Like, oh, speed control is good. I want speed control.
It's safe.
But yeah, I mean, getting it the right time is important, where in this case, you know, there wasn't too much threat of the Tailwind getting stalled out there. It was like a 4-turn game, but the damage mattered a lot. And I thought it was just such a good read where even if it had gone wrong, I guess we never see the 4th Pokemon to know exactly how things might have turned out, but it seems like Dylan kind of had checkmate there no matter what. And I think now this creates such an interesting situation where Dylan's now conditioned Brandon a little bit, where he probably has to bring some Pokemon that deal with the Bleakwind Storm a little bit better, so he can play around that now too. Or does Brandon now become the one who makes a similar read? Like, well, you've sort of forced me to do this, so I'm still not going to. You know, I'm going to mess with you a little bit, see if I can get you to play one step too far ahead.
Well, this is what happens in a best-of-3 set, as both of these players are hoping to keep their undefeated record alive. The winner of this match will only be 1 game away from making it into day 2 here in Vancouver. As both of these players are taking their full time to think about what Pokemon they want to bring to this really crucial match.
Yeah, this is just such a difficult team preview phase. Where, like, there's a heavy element of rock, paper, scissors, but somehow, you know, even if you get rock and your opponent gets scissors, turn 1 can still go either way most of the times, right? So it's like, I think you'll have to think through, like, okay, well, what are all the ways that if I pick these leads that turn 1 could develop, but how do I pick back Pokemon so either I can clinch the game if I have the advantage or just not kind of instantly lose it? Because I think like turn 2 last time, in both game 1 and game 2, we kind of know who was going to win the game.
Well, Dylan has decided to stick with what worked in game 2, leading the Raging Bolt and Tornadus, while Brandon has opted for Chin Pao and the Hearthflame Ogerpon. That is a lot of physical offense on the field, and crucially, easily covers the Steel Terra from Tornadus.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps the solution to this matchup is whoever strikes first wins, right? Where I think now there's a pretty free situation where this Ogerpon can try to go on the offensive maybe. You'd assume there will be a turn 1 Terrestrialization to avoid, or to remove some type weaknesses. You lose your resistance to electric, but probably worth it. And, it's a tough spot for Raging Bolt to try to call that, facing down to Chien Pao.
Yeah, it's all about, Brandon has so much offensive pressure against Dylan in this turn. It's all about sort of which target Brandon wants to focus down. Because there is no protect available on either of these Pokemon on Dylan's side, to protect them, he will have to switch out or go for the Terastallization, but the coverage that Brandon has with the Hearthflame Ogerpon and the Chien-Pao, especially now that this Hearthflame Ogerpon has Terrastallize, gets the attack boost and the boost to Ivy Cudgel, means that even if Dylan goes for a Terrastallization on defense to protect his Pokemon, they will still go down. Instead, Dylan just going for the Tailwind, which allows Raging Bolt to act first, gets Electro Web down onto both Ogerpon and Chien-Pao, crucially breaking the Focus Sash and dropping the speed of that Chien-Pao, as big damage from the Ice Spinner brings Raging Bolt down almost to 0 health, while Ogerpon's Ivy Cudgel will finish the job. So now Dylan has the Tailwind up and has speed drops onto both of Brandon's Pokemon, but Brandon struck first and got the Raging Bolt entirely off the field.
Really fun trade in that turn there. Getting Tailwind up first, I think this time is important. Potential Bleak Wind Storm not looking nearly as threatening this time. Would not have done enough without a critical hit or something to pick up either of these knockouts. So instead, getting that Tailwind safely so that whatever Pokemon comes in the back now is more threatening. I really like the Electro Web there. Dylan this time not committing that Terrastallization, which I think is so tricky to navigate a game when you have to give that up in the first turn. And, you know, getting the Focus Sash broken to this Chien-Pao is a big deal too. So I like that play if I'm Dylan, but this time finally in Game 3, I think it's much less clear on Game 2 who's going to win.
Absolutely. Urshifu now out on the field, facing down the Chien-Pao and the Ogerpon. Brandon's Chien-Pao now working against him, as the Sword of Ruin will be lowering the defense of his own Ogerpon, while Dylan, with the Tailwind advantage and the speed drops from the Electro Web, will be able to just sort of punch holes through Brandon's team with potential Wicked Blows coming out from that Urshifu, and of course still has the ability to deal some good damage with Bleak Wind Storms.
Yeah, it's going to be tough, where I think, you know, Brandon got that knockout, but he's really going to have to try to survive this Tailwind, and it's going to be tough. Both Pokemon surviving for now. Yeah,
Chien-Pao holding on crucially there. Ogerpon takes another speed drop, but that does not matter because it is just getting Wicked blown off the field. Ogerpon faints, and now Chien-Pao has the opportunity to fire back and attack. Another Ice Spinner will target down the Tornadus. Did not pick up the one-hit KO on the Raging Bolt, but does pick up the one-hit KO on the Tornadus as that Pokemon goes down. And Dylan, now down to his final 2 Pokemon, does have the big power of the Single Strike Urshifu, needs a lot out of that final Pokemon as well, as we see that Chien-Pao, Rapid Strike Urshifu, and Raging Bolt are the final Pokemon for Brandon.
Yeah, trying to make sure he sends out these Pokemon in the right order. Still 2 turns left of his Tailwind, and it's Landorus coming out in the field here. A devastating offensive Pokemon, and especially into this Raging Bolt. Perhaps Brandon predicting incorrectly about what this final Pokemon was going to be.
Yep, Landorus, the final Pokemon for Dylan. You have to wonder if Dylan had that Landorus in Game 2, but Brandon, of course, and we at home are all wondering that as well because we never saw the 4th Pokemon. But this Landorus is in a great position facing down the Raging Bolt and this this Chien-Pao that has both taken an Electro Web and is still slower than everything in Tailwind.
Yeah, sort of a strange spot here. You know, it's the 2 turns left of Tailwind, so normally you'd love to just go for a double protect here, but Urshifu will certainly be blocking something very hard. However, I think it's still an option you can consider. It's not going to do anything to Landorus, at least, where that could perhaps help you stall out this game, but then you still have to deal with the turn afterward. Raging Bolt is going to protect here, avoid getting deleted by the Landorus, so we'll have to see what this Urshifu does.
Well, Urshifu just goes for the Sucker Punch, not letting Brandon get any offense off with the Chien-Pao, picks up the KO.
They produce a substitute here? Oh, it's Earth Power, okay.
Protect from the Raging Bolt, keeps itself safe from the Earth Power. Dylan not going for substitute, just trying to sort of check Brandon, be like, you know what? I'm just not going to let you get turns.
Ooh, I'm not sure if it matters. As much as the substitute would have been nice there, I mean, Aqua Jet is not going to be a one-hit knockout here, I wouldn't think. And you'd assume the 2 Pokemon could double target, perhaps this Urshifu, and then you wind up in a situation later in the game, maybe, where Landorus is caught out fighting a Raging Bolt, and I don't know if he'd be too upset about that.
Yeah, and Dylan still has Terrastallization available, has not Terrastallized any of his Pokemon. So does have the opportunity to remove the water type weakness from Landorus and go for that Poison Terra, or just go for the, offense of Dark type on Urshifu.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe that's what I do, just to try to, make sure you burn through this Urshifu and assume that your Landorus can close it out against Raging Bolt, kind of no matter what happens.
Well, there is finally the terrestrialization. It's the offensive Dark Terra typing on the single strike Urshifu from Dylan Salvanera. These final Pokemon for both competitors. A Sucker Punch comes out, so Urshifu is going on the offensive into the Raging Bolt. Sucker Punching before a potential Thunderclap, while Aqua Jet is locked into by the Rapid Strike Urshifu, and Earth Power cleanly picks up the Raging Bolt KO. So now that Aqua Jet not quite a two-hit KO on the Landorus, as Tailwind peters out.
Yeah, I like that move even more. You kind of see Brandon realizing, oh man, that was great. Well, now you have the Focus Sash, Urshifu facing down its rival there on the other side of the field. Hard to see the way out of this one.
Yeah, especially with Aqua Jet not getting a critical hit, not picking up the KO on Landorus, and Landorus coming so close to a one-hit KO back. Dylan Salvanera's single strike Urshifu takes out the Rapid Strike, wins round 6, 2-1, and advances as a 6-0 record heading into our 7th round of Swiss.
Now, what a fun set. Things look really tough for Dylan after that first game. Kind of had a hard time getting a footing in that first game, but made such great reads in the second and third games. It never really was a situation where things looked easy for him, or he had to be very clever almost every turn, but was able to navigate his way through the game so well. And I think that's what makes Dylan so much fun to watch as a player, where he always has these teams that are just so kind of awkward to play against, where there's Pokemon you're used to facing off against, and a lot of Pokemon who are difficult to play defensively against, and he's just so good at taking advantage of putting his opponent into challenging positions. I think Brandon played pretty well there. He didn't do anything crazy, but Dylan was able to kind of just make the moves to put him in tough positions, and had some really clever solutions, I thought, to the solutions that the situations he found himself in over the course of the match.
Yeah, absolutely. Really hard to find fault with anything Brandon did during that set. Maybe in game 2, bringing all 3 of your flying type weaknesses and none of your flying type resists. Obviously something that Brandon did not repeat in game 3. But really, you're totally right. Dylan especially played this Tornadus so very well. In game 2, going on the offensive with the Bleak Wind Storm. In game 3, realizing that both the Raging Bolt and the Tornadus were checkmated from turn 1. And then immediately getting the Tailwind on the field and being able to sort of, take the Tailwind, get the Electro Web off to break the Focus Sash on Chen Pao, as well as dropping speed on both of those Pokemon if, if both those Pokemon would have stayed out while Tailwind failed or went down. And then just going on the offensive and making sure to have, these offensive pieces in the back, the Landorus and the Urshifu single strike, targeting so well, making great decisions there to cover all options for Brandon.
Yeah, I think it's just really well played too, where, I think it's like ignoring Skeledirge. The rest of Dylan's team is something that I think players are prepared for, right?
Right.
I don't think it's that wild of a Tailwind team. He's got some tweaks even on the rest of the squad, I think, that make things a little bit more difficult. But the trouble is, you can flowchart against the idea of a team, and facing against it piloted by a player of this skill level is just a little bit different, right? And I think there's so many ways he could easily have lost that set, like kind of in embarrassing fashion, and just never made that mistake. Or maybe I think even calling. There are a lot of ways he could have lost, I think, both game 2 and game 3, that I think a mistake might be the wrong word for it, right? Where there are turns where I think more options kind of in the flowchart lead to a bad outcome for Dylan than a good one.
Right.
He did such a good job of both figuring out what Brandon was going to do, but also I think kind of the experience of creating a board position. I know what my opponent will normally do here. I'm kind of tempting him to do something that isn't a good idea. I think, especially that second game, it just seemed like Dylan started out in such a challenging position where it seemed like, well, he's kind of got to play defensively here, and that just doesn't work with this sort of team, right? And then wisely saw the opportunity to turn things around, go on the offensive instead of just playing out a slow losing game and getting the 1-0. I don't want to lose too badly on stream loss. Instead, pulling through, playing aggressively, getting the dub.
Absolutely, really well played there from Dylan. And the Skeledirge, of course, did not really do a whole lot when we saw it in game 1. But even just the opportunity of having that Pokemon, we saw in game 3, Brandon was kind of thinking about, do I bring the King Gambit this time? Is this it? But actually having the ability to sort of threaten Skeledirge, and in game 1 show, Dylan showing, I'm not afraid to bring my rogue Pokemon here. And if your King Gambit gets burned, then it's kind of useless, especially because it doesn't have Swords Dance to counter that. And so keeping that Pokemon off the field, which is one of the only flying type resistances that Brandon has on the team, made it really difficult for Brandon to sort of work around the other pieces of Dylan's team.
Yeah, I kind of hope we get to see Dylan again, too, because I think this Skeledirge into Chien-Pao thing's really interesting, right? Where, in theory, there's a problematic type matchup there for the Skeledirge a little bit, but, like, it resists ice, it's immune to fighting, and you can't actually Sucker Punch it if it's going for the Will-O-Wisp, right? So Chien-Pao kind of just loses there, and, in the first game, Brandon did such a good job of realizing that, not falling for it, dodging the Will-O-Wisp twice, and then at that point, Skeledirge had wasted so many turns, he was able to take control of the game. But it's easy to imagine a different matchup where perhaps Skeledirge is better against the rest of the team, and it kind of just runs over the match the other way instead. So who knows? Maybe later in the tournament we'll get to see that as well.
Absolutely. Well, we are going to see a little bit more of Dylan right now as Gabby is talking with him to hear his thoughts on how that match went. Gabby, take it away.
Hello, thank you so much. I think we are back. Are we back? No, we aren't. That's okay. My name is Gabby Snyder. You can hear me now, and I'm here with Dylan, let's be real, you all want to hear from him. So Dylan, first of all, impeccable fashion sense. Tell me about the shirt.
Oh, so my shirt, last year actually at Vancouver, I got top 4 with the team. Try and stand up a little bit. So like Baxcalibur, Sandy Shocks, Tauros, very unique picks that I used last year. One of my favorite teams that I used last season, so I had to get a shirt with it. And I've been saving this shirt just for this regional. I haven't worn it once.
You haven't worn it once, but yet it looks like it was made specifically for you. So is it the lucky charm? I mean, you're undefeated. It must be helping a little bit.
Yeah, like I definitely think that this just made me I'm just like so happy about this shirt. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. It's one of my favorite teams, and it was like the one regional I did well with last year. And so I have to represent last year, this year. And one thing too is that also is I guess you could say last year I had unique picks in the Sandy Shocks and Blazeberry Tauros. This year I have the Skeledirge. Granted, it's only limited to one unique pick, but it's still one.
I mean, sometimes all you need is one unique pick, and that was actually something that Scott was just talking about going into this interview. Skeledirge seems like it has all the tools to just kind of get going, slack off to recover its HP, unaware to ignore stat changes. So where did the Skeledirge come from, and how has it been serving you so far today?
So the Skeledirge kind of came from one of my best friends, Marcos Perez, otherwise known as Moxie Boosted on social media. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of him. We were driving down on the car ride to an Indianapolis, a bunch of midseason and PCs a couple of weeks back. I was in a rut. I had a very bad showing in Charlotte, so I was like, I need a team. And we just spent the whole car ride listening to podcasts, and he was on Skeledirge for the longest time. I'm like, okay, what if I just take my team that I currently have right now, the 5 that I have, and then instead of Incineroar, which is like most common balance core, instead I put Skeledirge over it, because I feel like Skeledirge would be more proactive, and there's a few things that are really hard counters that a lot of people do not expect.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think I expected it. I'm assuming your opponent, Brandon, in the last round felt like he sort of expected it, because you were saying as well, game 1 wasn't really the best showing for Skeledirge.
Oh yeah, I definitely have to say that it was I want to say that I was kind of baited into bringing it, because Chien-Pao is a good matchup in it. Safety Goggles against Amoonguss is really good. Ogre Fire is technically pretty good, but he had Stomping Tantrum, but that's still pretty good because you have Unaware to ignore the boosts. And then he had the other one. Oh yeah, King Gambit. That was also another positive matchup for Skeledirge. But it just didn't really do well in game 1. But I will say it has carried a lot of my previous rounds, despite it not having a good showing.
I mean, you're undefeated, so it definitely seems like Skeledirge is the MVP, but I do want to talk about games 2 and 3 because you pivoted away from Skeledirge. It felt like you focused more on the balance form of the team. You had that great Steel-type Terastallization on Tornadus. Was that a pivot you were prepared to make, or were you sort of coming up with the line on the fly?
I want to say that's a line that I've always had in the back of my head. There's a lot of the against Chin Pao, Scarf, Urshifu leads, it's very volatile because you don't know if they're going to want to pivot out or like click Surging Strikes. You give you a free option to click Thunderclap. And then there's also like, I think that one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that the Tornadus can Terra out of the flying typing to get like either Steel, or some people might use other stuff, and take the Ice Spinner very well. As you can see in that game 2, that really served me very well.
Yeah, it did. And also that late tailwind as well just felt like it gave your team that little extra boost it needed to go ahead and win. Going into game number 3, were there any adjustments that you were worried about, or was there any sort of strategy you were like, okay, I've played this team twice, now I know this is my goal for how do I win the set, how do I move on, and hopefully get one step closer to day 2?
So going into game 3, it was really rough because he led the Ogerpon and the Chin Pao, which meant that I knew that if he doubled into one slot, guaranteed that slot is going down. Because especially with the Sword of Ruin plus the Terra Fire, Ivy Cudgel, even if I Terra Fairy on my Raging Bolt, he's still gonna chunk me very heavily. So I kind of went to a game plan where it's just like Tailwind, Electro Web, kind of let my leads go down and have both Urshifu and Landorus hopefully be able to clean up whatever's in the back. And by that time, there's enough damage done by Torn and Raging Bolt.
Makes sense. One thing I want to go back to real quick before we wrap this interview up, you said you had kind of a rough couple of tournaments. Do you have any advice for anybody at home watching who maybe has had a rough couple tournaments, maybe a global challenge that kind of took the wind out of their sails? And like, how do you bounce back from that?
So I want to say this, is that taking a break is by far the best thing. Like I had a very bad showing in Charlotte, probably the worst tournament ever. And then I also just had a bad weekend overall. I got really sick, so I had to stay in Charlotte an extra day. Couldn't make my flight because of that. So I was really upset. I ended up canceling Knoxville too. A lot of my friends advised me that I didn't go. And also it's just like, so I guess it's just like what it is just like take breaks. Like playing a lot is nice, but do it in moderation so you don't burn yourself like I did. Like I took a long-term break all the way from February up into mid-March, and I started playing the game again. And like I said, I came back with Marcos on that car ride to Indy, and I mean, look at me now. I'm doing good again.
Yeah, I mean, breaks are always great. I know my personal break recently has been a lot of Pokemon Unite, believe it or not. So I'm glad to hear that you were able to take time for yourself, and I'm glad that it's paying off. So to give you a break before our next round, do you have any shout outs you want to give before you wrap up?
Always got to give one to my mom. Love you, Mom. Nick Willems out in the crowd, Joseph Iragate, who also helped me refine the team, obviously Marcos Perez, everybody in the Mason server, formerly known as the Zach server. Too many people to list out, so I'm just calling you out now. Lorcy, helping me every now and then. Anybody else? Dude, I'm drawing blanks. I'm sorry, but it's just a lot of people.
All right, so at everyone then in the server.
Yes, pretty much.
All right, Dylan. Well, thank you so much for your time. Best of luck moving forwards in this tournament. Casters, why don't we throw back to you?